Welcome to lecture number 7. Give me a second until I get my laser pointer. Okay, there you go. So we've already started talking about prevening calf management during the previous lecture, and let's continue. Right. So the first question I want you to think about is, right, so we obviously talked about calves drinking milk, right? What else do calves eat and drink? So I want you to think about that for a second. Do they eat grass? Do they eat concentrated feed? Do they eat something else? Do they drink something else? Right? So I hope you were able to synthesize the answers. If not, please pause the video, think about it, and come back. Okay, right. So basically, in addition to milk, they obviously drink water, right? And then we also give them concentrate feed, right? So at this stage, you may not have seen these concentrate feeds yet. So they are basically like pellets. You might have seen in broilers, layers, cattle, goats, all of them get this commercial feed which we call as concentrated feeds because they are really high in nutrition, right? So the nutrients are concentrated compared to natural feedstuffs like foragers, right? So that's why we call them concentrates, right? And then of course we also need to give some kind of a forage or roughage, right, to calves at different stages, right? So the exact time points we will go through during the lecture. Right. So now we know whether babies, right, human babies or ruminants, all of these animals, mammals, right, they consume milk when they are young, right? So why do they need milk? Why can't they consume the adult diet? In our case, in humans' case, why can't babies eat rice and chicken and beef steak? Huh? Why can't they drink alcohol? Some of you might ask, right? And same with goats and cattle. Why do they drink milk and why do they not eat grass, right? So why do you think that is? Right? Okay, so again, take a minute to think about it, right? Um, it's probably to do with the digestive system, right? Because their digestive systems are not developed yet, right? Or their digestive systems are developed to process, digest, accept something else, which is milk, not the adult diet, right? So think about that for a minute. Right? So in an adult ruminant, right? Let's say, for example, a 500 kilogram cow, the rumen, right? So when you say rumen, so usually we say is the complex stomach which has 4 chambers, right? Rumen, reticulum, abomasum, omasum, right? So the rumen alone has about 150 to 200 liters, and that occupies about 80% of the volume of the total stomach, right? So that would be an adult animal, right? But if you look at a calf, newborn calf, do you expect the same amounts, right? So can you recall from your digestive physiology what the job of the rumen is? What does it have? Does it get gastric juices? Does it have gastric enzymes? Uh, pepsinogen, trypsinogen, pepsin, trypsin, amylase, all these do those enzymes get secreted into the rumen? What kind of a digestion goes on here, right? So what does the rumen digest? What's the function of the abomasum? Does abomasum digest the same things as the rumen, or does it digest something else, right? Is there a fundamental difference between the digestion process that takes place between these two? Right, so think about those, and then based on what you just recalled, do you think the proportions of the rumen would be the same in the calves, right? So if the function of the rumen is rumination, that is nothing to do with milk, that's to do with foragers and roughagers, right? So what do you expect the composition of the complex stomach of the calves to be? It's, as you can see, it's quite dramatically different from the adult animal, right? So rumen occupies only 25% of the volume, whereas abomasum occupies 60% of the volume. Why is that? Because the calf consumes milk, right? And milk is almost like a feed of a monogastric animal. So this is almost a monogastric stomach compared to a polygastric or ruminant stomach in the adult animal, right? So with this type of anatomy and physiology, do you think you can feed foragers to calves, right? So calves, right? They have a the rumen is not developed at the beginning, right? So it gradually improves in size, and when they're mature, they have as much as 80% of the stomach volume occupied by the rumen, right? But here it's as little as 25%, and abomasum would gradually go down from 60% to 7%, as shown on the previous 60% to 7%, right, slide. Right, so that is one. And so now, so uh, so initially they drink milk. So why don't us adults drink milk throughout the lifetime, or cattle? Why do all mammals don't drink milk throughout their lifetimes? What do you think might be the reason? Yeah, so I can think of at least two reasons, right? So one is milk is, probably not as nutritionally high as some of the solid feeds you eat, right? And then another reason is that milk is obviously more expensive, right? Um, Monetary wise, right? So of course, grass may not be as nutritive as milk, but things we eat, carbohydrates, rice, meat, they are nutritionally richer and more condensed than milk, right? Because milk has about 90% water, 86%, 87% water, right? So if we wanted to get all nutrients from milk, we would have to drink a much larger volume. When it comes to cattle, milk is also more expensive. A farmer can sell a liter of milk, anywhere from 70 rupees to 120 rupees, whereas grass is a lot cheaper resource, right? So some of them can even find it for free. Others will pay a much smaller price. Right. So if you can, so we call this process of, stopping feeding milk, we call it weaning, right? So if we can wean early from milk to grass, or, foragers, ravagers, you can save money because milk is more expensive than grass, as I mentioned earlier. So if you continue feeding milk, it'll be more expensive, right? Obviously, right. So early weaning is therefore better than late weaning. However, you should be careful when you wean, right? Because just because earlier the better, that doesn't mean you should wean when the animal's rumen is not ready to accept foragers, right? So So what you can do is you have to try and speed up or expedite rumen development so that you can wean as early as possible, right? So recall we talked about the goals of pre-weaning management last time. As you know, we want to produce a healthy calf, we want to produce a well-grown calf, and of course we want transition of rumen from monogastric to ruminant stage, from pre-ruminant to ruminant phase, right? So that is one of the major goals of pre-weaning management. Traditionally, conventional farmers in Sri Lanka, they are not even aware of this. Their goal is to get a well-grown calf as much as possible. They are not even aware that this happens, right, during the pre-weaning phase. But you and all veterinarians should be aware, and not only aware, you should also try to speed up or expedite this transition from monogastric to ruminant, right? Okay. So now, do you think this transition is something that takes place overnight? Today it was a monogastric animal, and tomorrow suddenly it's a ruminant. Do you think that that's how it takes place, or do you think it takes place slowly, right? So anything in nature, physiology, it's always gradual. You don't get abrupt changes like that. And even management wise, if you make any abrupt changes, that is bound to have negative effects on the animal's health and production, so on, right? So we need to try and uh, when we do any changes, we need to make them as gradual as possible, and we need to be aware that even the physiological system is like that. There are no abrupt changes. Instead, what you get is gradual changes. So pre-ruminant phase, that is like the first 2 weeks where animal is 100% monogastric animal almost, right, consuming entirely milk, and then after the it becomes a ruminant, of course, after weaning, it's able to consume forages just like an adult animal, but there is a transition phase in between, right? So depending on how good or bad your management is, it might be short or long, right? So if you do a really good pre-weaning management practice and you expedite rumen development, this can be as low as 6 weeks, or it can be as long as 12-16 weeks, right? So that is your goal as a veterinarian, as a farm manager, to shorten this period as much as possible, right? So that you can wean the calves as early as possible. Optimal in the Sri Lankan situation might be something like 8 weeks or 2 months, right? So remember, before this stage, rumen is not ready for forages and therefore not ready for weaning. However, you want to develop the rumen as much as possible, as fast as possible, so that you can wean quicker, faster, earlier. Therefore, you can save on the cost of milk that is fed to the calves, right? Okay, so now, do you think this rumen development is just a enlargement of the size, increase of the volume, or do you think certain other changes might be taking place, right? So it's not only the volume, right, but it is also the papillary development inside the rumen, right? And then microbes, like I asked you earlier, is it a enzymatic digestion or is it a microbial digestion that takes place? The latter, right? So therefore you have to establish microbes. When the calf is born, it doesn't have microbes. It will get microbes obviously from the surroundings, right, from the environment. So that is something that should develop. Then of course, as the rumen volume expands, 80 100 liters is 100 kilograms, right? So to hold 100 kilograms without rupture, and to move the ruminal content, contractions, the muscular wall has to be thick, and strong, right? So that is a third development. And the fourth is, you can have papilla, but if they all stick together and clump together, they won't be able to do their job, because when you have papilla, obviously the role is to improve surface area, right? To provide a large surface area than a flat surface, right? So if they clump together, they won't be able to provide that large surface area, which may be for absorption, which may be for secretion, and so on, right? So these are the four main aspects of rumen development we talk about, and these are the four main aspects we have to expedite where possible, right? So that calves can be weaned as soon as possible, right? So you might think it is foragers that actually expedite rumen papillae development or rumen development altogether, because that is the natural feed for cattle. But in reality, it's actually not the natural grass, straw, water, or milk, but this artificial, so-called artificial feed, which is concentrates, that actually expedite papillae development, right? So with milk only, I think these are photographs taken at 12 weeks of the rumen. So they took three groups of calves, right? So they fed milk to one group, milk and hay to another group, and milk and grain to a third group, right? So grain would be what? What's grain? Like corn, maize, right? So those are grains, right? So grains are more or less similar to concentrates, because both the concentrates and grains have easily digestible high amounts of carbohydrates compared to grass and hay, right? So this experiment, you can substitute with grains with concentrates, right? So this experiment showed that at the end of, I think this was so this was done by University of Pennsylvania State, right? And I think this is 12 weeks. I'm not sure exactly, but even from 6 weeks onwards, you can see these changes, where if you gave milk only, hardly any development of rumen papillae. Milk and hay are not much different, but if it's this group where you gave milk and grain, that you got this massive papillary development, right? So you can expect the same effect if you gave milk and concentrate also, right? So remember, it's not the natural roughages or water and milk, but it's the concentrates that produce the best development of rumen papillae, right? So it has to be something, a chemical stimulant in these feeds that have this positive effect on papillary growth, right? So you might recall from your gastrointestinal physiology from first year that there are these three major volatile fatty acids produced in the rumen by the microbes, right? Acetate, propionate, and butyrate. So out of these, butyrate has the strongest effect on papillary development, epithelial development on the rumen, right? Propionate also has to a certain extent, and acetate has a minimal positive effect, right? So acetate usually comes from foragers, right? So hay, right? So that's the effect hay or acetate has on rumen development. And butyrate and propionate comes from grain or concentrate feeds, right? So that is the effect these have, butyrate, propionate, grain, on rumen papillary development, right? So remember, this effect comes from propionate and butyrate mainly. Right. So this is what the undeveloped rumen epithelium looks like, and this is what the developed rumen epithelium looks like. And this is your goal, to convert this to this in as a short period as possible, as a veterinarian, as a farm manager, right? So that should be your goal. So how do you do that? right? So that is the question as a veterinarian. How do you expedite that, right? So under proper management, so in a histological perspective, right? So this rumen without any papilla would look something like this. See the mucosa, no papillary structures. So that is day 3. So as you go on towards day 35, you see the development of papilla slowly, papilla emerging gradually and steadily, and then by about day 35 you have distinct papilla, under proper management conditions. That is, if you keep giving milk and hay, for example, you won't get this at day 35. Even at day 35 you might have something like this, right? So that is why you have this kind of picture, right? If you give milk and hay, no papillary development, whereas this has a lot of papilla, right, and folds and all that. Okay, right. So I know. So something I always remember is, I hope you have learned during your second year, Cox postulates. Did you learn Cox postulates? Can you recall? That's like, if you want to prove a disease, right? A certain pathogen caused the disease, right? So this was, postulated by Koch, a scientist, some time back, centuries ago, Koch, if I remember right. So one thing is that you have to be able to reproduce that. You have to inject the organism and reproduce the clinical picture, right? So similarly here, now if we suspect that this is done by butyric acid, you should be able to reproduce that experimentally, right? So that is what this study did. Infusion of sodium butyrate promotes rumen papillary growth, right? So what they basically did was they took a control group and a treatment group, right? So this is a treatment group where sodium butyrate was given. This is a negative control group where sodium butyrate was not given, right? So when they gave sodium butyrate, papillary length was increased, right? Width was not increased. Width was also increased. See, look at the p-value, significant. So you may not understand this at this stage. So significant p-value, if you get less than 0.05, that means that is statistically significant, right? So both the length increased from 2.76 to 3.33, width increased from 1.13 to 1.31, and then surface area increased from 900 to 1200, right? So 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 what is this density? Density did not increase, p-value is not significant. Density would be like how many papilla per square centimeter, right? So the number of papillae doesn't get affected. It is the size of papillae that increase with butyrate, right? So butyrate then, of course, in the natural situation comes from feeding perspective, comes from concentrate, and so this same situation happens. Okay, so go through this also and see what that means to you, right? So because of these findings, traditionally calves were fed, the guidelines were to feed calves with high quality hay, right? But now in the modern practice, feeding calves hay is not acceptable, right? For this reason that we explained. Right? So here's another experiment done to look at the effect of hay. Right? So they gave one group no hay, the second group 2% of the diet was hay, the third group 4% of the diet was hay. Right? So when they gave hay, right, so the red group received the highest amount of hay. The body weight gain was lowest in that group, 17% less compared to this group, right? and then calf starter, that is concentrate feed, was also consumed less by those animals, right? So basically the take home message here for you at this stage is, with 0% hair they had the highest body weight gain, and higher the hair, lower the body weight gain and other parameters, right? So which is pretty bad, right? So for this reason we don't recommend feeding calves hay in the modern practice, right? So remember that you cannot forget, right? See, again same thing, milk and hay, you see this tiny papilla, right? At 12 weeks, here massive papilla, right, with grain. Okay, so how do we speed this up from this naked rumen without papilla to rumen filled with papilla, right? So acetic acid is gotten from foragers, whereas butyric and propionate is produced from pellets, right? So these are the calf starter pellets that I talked about, right? Concentrate pellets, right? So we need to give as much of this as possible instead of that, right? We want to expedite or speed up rumen development, right? Now of course, so these age in weeks, right? So you don't expect calves to eat a kilo of calf starter as soon as you introduce it. Why? For one reason, this is not a natural feed, right? So if you think about the calf's preference, right, preference would be highest for, foragers, because that is a natural feed resource for them, whereas concentrate pellets are not natural, right? So if you give the choice of foragers versus concentrate feeds to an untrained calf, right, of course when they become trained at eating concentrates, then of course they will develop a liking towards it. But if they are not trained, right, then they will prefer foragers over concentrates, right? So that's why as soon as you offer this, they will eat only, a few grams. So that's like, less than 100 grams, right? So you introduce it at early as 4 days, they will probably not consume it sufficiently until about 2 weeks, right? Then it gradually increases, right? So then by 8 weeks, which we said was the ideal time for weaning, they are consuming about 1 kilogram. They would consume if you follow the proper best management practices of pre-weaning calf management, right? So that is in fact our goal, is to make calves eat 1 kilogram of concentrate feeds or calf starter by 8 weeks, or by weaning they should be eating 1 kilogram of calf starter per day, right? So daily consumption, if they can do that, right, then that is fantastic. You have done a good job in pre-weaning calf management, right? So remember, that is the goal, and it has been shown scientifically that the higher the quantity of calf starter intake before the week of weaning, right, the week before weaning, higher the average daily gain post weaning, right? So if they eat a lot of concentrates prior to weaning, they are bound to be fast growers, right? So that their average daily body weight gain is higher, right? So animals that ate little amounts of concentrates had a slow body weight gain post weaning, and animals that ate large quantity of calf starter prior to weaning showed a high post weaning body weight gain, right? So that should be your goal. The faster they grow, the more they grow, the more milk they will give as adults, right? Right, so same thing. And then so this shows the body weight, right, from birth to 12 weeks. And so you can use this, assuming that the calves were weaned at 8 weeks of age. So I want you to do a calculation for body weight gain, average daily gain, pre-weaning and post-weaning, based on the body weights you see on the y-axis. So do that and see what you get. Right? So remember, when we see this is qualitative proof, right? And this would be quantitative proof, right? So when you design a proper experiment, you can't just say, I saw that this group had better growth of rumen papilla than group A. You can't say that. That is not scientifically acceptable. You have to give quantitative proof. You have to say group A growth was only this, but group B growth was that. So remember, that is how you should design an experiment, right? So it's really important because you will be doing a small research project at the end of your final year, right? And you have to think of these aspects right at the beginning. You can't go at the end of the experiment. Examiner might say, okay, this is poor experimental design. Now you can't go back to the beginning and restructure, right? So that is why even from the very beginning you have to structure it in such a way so that you won't run into that problem, right? So this is milk only, this is milk plus calf starter, right? So obviously their length is higher, width is higher, density is not higher, surface area is higher. See, significant p values for this, non-significant p value for that. Okay, so same data I showed you earlier on the rumen papilla, right? So this is the effect on the rest of the parameters, right? Rumen weight, right? So here actually p-value is not significant because it is above 0.5, right? So what that says is, it doesn't have an effect on the butyrate, right? Doesn't have an effect on the rumen development as a whole or the rumen musculature development. The effect is on the papilla, right? So empty rumen weight, p-value is significant here, close to 0.5, right? So obviously the papilla has extra weight, right? So this slight difference might be because of that, because this doesn't have papilla, this has papilla, right? So that means the muscular wall is the same, it's just the papilla, right? So I'm assuming, right? Of course, to prove that, you will have to scrape out the papilla and measure them separately, right? So just go through these parameters, right? Go through these parameters and see if you can make sense of those, right? So this is important because you want this knowledge to design a proper experiment when it comes to your final year. Okay guys, so we will stop here for today and we will continue next week with the rest. Okay, so don't forget to answer the questions before you look at, now it's too late for me to say that, of course, you should ideally have answered the questions before you looked at the or watched the video lecture. Okay guys, thank you and see you next week.